Good morning, Darren.
Good morning, Taryn.
So nice to be in our studio for the very first time with you today.
My very first time. I am happy to be here this morning.
Well, we're glad you could join us.
Yes.
This is going to be a new, hopefully consistent thing with us on a monthly basis where we get to come in here and talk to y'all about what's going on in the safety world and elaborate a little more on some things that we broach during our safety chats on Friday.
Yes.
So last Friday, Darren, we were talking about electronic logging devices.
Yes.
And specifically, we were discussing
More on the side of how to check for falsification when you're looking at your hours of service. And, the topic is, well, I don't have to check for hours of service violations because I have ELDs. And because I have ELDs, I don't need to check against supporting documentation, and I think that's the wrong perspective to have. So we just kind of want to piggyback on that conversation from Friday. And I think it's so important with the number of off-site investigations that's taking place by our state and federal partners. So I think we need to just talk about some specifics and kind of help everybody to look at it from a proactive standpoint of how to go out and check, your electronic records.
Yeah, it became a crutch.
Yeah.
Everybody thought we're going to electronic logging devices. We don't really need to do our due diligence because the programs are going to do it for us.
That's correct. Which it does. When it comes down to your 11-hour, your 14-hour, your 30-minute break, you can run the reports. And most of the ELD, devices, it'll give you that on your dashboard. But when it comes down to checking for falsification, that still has to be done by picking up a field report and matching up dates and times. And I think that's critical. And I think for the most part, a lot of the feedback that I get is I don't have the time or I don't have the personnel to do that. And I just don't think that's going to go well.
Well, I mean, do you have the time or the money to actually pay the fines? I mean, there's your trade-off.
Well, that's the thing. Are we going to put profits over safety or safety over profits? You got to figure out, okay, I call it donation. If you want to donate $10,000 to the FMCSA, or do you want to take a fraction of that and say, let me hire a log auditor for somebody to come in and do these things? So it's a critical topic to talk about because, especially in our legal climate, that's a whole other topic for another day.
That's a big topic.
So I don't think you would want to be involved in a crash and find out that your driver was doing everything right except for not, being compliant with the hours of service. So it's critical.
So if we're talking about, we have these electronic logging devices, we have these amazing programs that track everything for us. And then, the feds in the state have been able, through ERODs, to transfer all of that data, which does what, Darren? It automatically sends up a red flag, correct?
Yes.
So they already know where the pinch points are.
Correct.
And they can see them automatically. So then we need to have our companies and our members being more diligent in watching out and preventing those red flags.
Correct.
All right. So give us a couple of examples about what you've seen while you've been doing audits and how you would suggest they correct them.
And I think, too, when you said when they transfer to ERODs, it will pinpoint, where there's a 14 or 11-hour, 30-minute rule break or 70-hour, 6-hour, whatever it is. But again, it does not, and I hadn't been on ERODs, but it does not tell them where the falsifications. They still ask you for supporting documents to match up dates, times, and if it's applicable to that driver, far as having the driver's name or vehicle number on that supporting document. So some of the things that I'm seeing is, and I wrote down just maybe 4 of them that I could think off the top of my head is, the abuse of personal conveyance and yard moves.
Oh, PC and yard moves.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can elaborate a little. Personal conveyance, in our opinion, should be used sparingly.
Yes.
And there should be a written policy in place.
Yes.
And it should be very structured and very well monitored.
Yes.
So, and then on yard moves, that should technically only be used for maintenance or yard jockeying.
Yes, and then if you ever, I don't know if you ever been out, but when I was driving, you go out to Bentonville, Arkansas, where Walmart is, you got blocks. And so you can still end up turning out on a roadway or a highway, and you can still be on yard moves. But I think, like you said, it has to be clarified in your policy, what is personal conveyance being used for, PC. It should be used for short distances, whether you're going to lodging or whether you're going to, get something to eat. But you got to be careful with PC because it still can bring up an issue if you get involved in a crash while you're doing PC. So when we say abuse of PC and what makes the law false, drivers will say, hey, look, I'm gonna leave here and I'm just heading down to the port, to get my box. And I'm going to PC from my house there, but you're still under dispatch. You're still under moving at the direction of the company.
Right.
So you have to be careful with that, and that's where you see a lot of falsifications and furthering commerce.
That is a key catchphrase for what is and what is not PC.
Well, let's break it down. Commerce is what? You're making money.
That's right.
So you got to be
clock.
careful. If you're on that clock and you're making money, it's almost getting to the point now where I'm seeing most of some of our members and companies that I come in contact with, they're turning PC off. And if the driver needs to use personal conveyance, they have to call into their dispatcher just so that it doesn't bring up falsification of hours of service.
Yeah, there's lots of examples over the past couple of years where personal conveyance has been locked down and tightened up because it was causing too many issues. I mean, we had Joe DeLorenzo from FMCSA here went into a whole spiel about personal conveyance, which led to a lot of other questions. So Deron and I think have gotten so well versed in what is and what is not PC. So if in doubt, just don't use it.
Yes.
And if you have any questions specifically, then you can give either one of us a call and we can work through that with you in more detail.
Especially with owner-operators.
Yes.
Because they say it's my truck. Yes, it is your equipment, but you're still running under that particular company's DOT and MC number and insurance. So you got to be careful with that, especially when owner-operators get in trouble as well. I'm going to do maintenance on a Saturday morning, and I'm just going right down the street to my friend who does maintenance work, and we're just going to work. Well, you're still doing that in furthers what? Commerce. Yeah. You're preparing that vehicle to go back out on your next run, whether it be Sunday night or Monday morning. So you can't PC to go do maintenance work. So that would create a false log, okay? Now, although PC is recorded as pretty much on line 1, it has that little broken dotted line as off-duty driving time, you still got to be careful. You don't want to PC from Jacksonville, Florida, all the way to Columbia, South Carolina. I guess you could. I don't.
Under the right circumstances.
Okay, but for the most part, as high as fuel is, I don't think you're going to PC that far. Okay, so that's one of the most common ones is PC and yard moves. Okay, so make sure you brought up policy. And we know how policy is, so when you talk about policy, that's pretty much the holy grail. So whatever your policy is, you need to be doing it.
Right. And, the only thing I want to really mention on yard moves, too, is yard moves should have their specific login for their ELD.
Yes.
And in order to protect that login, you should probably look at changing the password from time to time and not leaking it. There have been plenty of stories about drivers who are actually logging into a maintenance login.
That's the one I was about to bring up.
Yes.
The mechanics login.
Yes, the mechanic login.
Yeah.
So best practice, change your password frequently.
AKA ghost drivers. Yeah, the mechanic took the truck out, but the mechanic took the truck out with a load and a trailer from Savannah to Raleigh, North Carolina. Boy, that's a long test ride. So you got to be careful with that. So very, very, very good points there. So yes.
All right.
Possibly another way of indications of false log is not certifying the e-logs at the end of the day. And let's just not leave it to e-logs, because there's some people still running paper logs, and we'll get into time sheets a little bit later, but these electronic logs have to be certified at the end of the duty shift. Okay, so you got to be careful. And I get drivers say, well, the auditor or the roadside inspector wanted me to certify the logs. Well, it doesn't have to be certified until you're at the end of your day. Okay, so you got to make sure that you're certifying your electronic logs at the end of each day. So that's another indication of false logs. Okay. why would you not want to certify something that you've already done and completed?
So from an inside perspective, a staff perspective, looking back at the e-logs at the end of the day, that is a relatively easy check.
Correct.
So that should be on a checklist. Did all of the drivers at the end of their shift certify their logs?
And again, you brought it up. The ELD system can automatically provide you a report, and that would fall in the form and manner, if I'm not mistaken. So you see form and manner, you'd be like, when you see form and manner, it's either going to be they're missing the shipping document information, or they didn't certify the log. That's your form and manner.
And most of those are plug and play. At the end of the day, you'll get a notification. So that should be an easy fix. And then track them down. Get them to certify. All right. This is always a fun one.
Yeah.
Unplugging and disconnecting ELDs.
Which is serious.
It's a big violation.
I don't think I ran across it when I was on the road. We had a drive, we pulled into the scales, and we were just trying to figure out, how did you end up, his log just showed him all of a sudden in Charleston.
Teleportation.
Oh, he had Star Trek? Okay, all right. So he just ended up in Charleston. But finally, one of my counterparts walked off, and I said, just tell me, driver to former driver, tell me, how did you do this? And he just said, I'll be honest with you, he just unscrewed the rivets on his dashboard, and somehow he disconnected the harness, and bam, there you go. As soon as he plugged it back up, all the data came through, and now we figured out how he did it. Serious violation. If he would have gotten in action, even if somebody would have rear-ended him, it is his fault, because it would have showed that he disconnected or unplugged his ELD.
Well, and it doesn't just stop there.
No.
It also impacts your IFTA
Yes.
and your audits there, because they're cracking down on mileage.
Right.
And I mean, it's a trickle effect.
Yeah. Why? You know what the funny part is most of the time when I'm auditing logs, the driver has enough time to do what they need to do.
So
for the most part. So the unplugging and the falsification of logs, to me, is just a misunderstanding. They feel as if somebody's taking time from them, when in actuality they're getting more time. They're gaining more time to do it, because on a paper log it's 15-minute increments. With this ELD, you go in second by second. You can have the EKG thing going on.
Right.
So why unplug? Why disconnect?
Just let it run.
Why are you trying to hide or thinking that you're going to get away with it? It's just too much technology now.
It's just a mindset.
Well, that brings up another point. How do we change that mindset?
I think that overall the industry's done a pretty darn good job, because when we first started looking at ELDs, if you remember, it was like, I'm not going to stay in this. I'm going to quit. I'm going to shut down. I'm going to turn in my CDL. I'm going to give it up. I don't want Big Brother watching me.
Yeah.
But then think about it. I mean, we have these on a daily basis.
Right.
These little phones that have GPS and everything else. And so we're tracked no matter what.
And again, I mean, there's only so much money you're going to make. I mean, if you're going to sit here and try to drive, now I'm past statute limitations, but it's only so much driving you're going to do. If you drive, I mean, I've been out there where I drove, and got back here and then couldn't move the next day. So look at the risk that I'm taking. It's not that anybody's watching you. It's just, like you said, it's a mindset of, I don't want anybody watching me. I figure I can drive, and end up either losing your life or me. No, it's not good for your body.
It's not good for you as a driver. One of the benefits of ELDs that we saw coming into this was it's going to verify that you're actually making the time and getting paid for the time that you're working. And then from a company perspective, the same thing. I mean, it balances out, and it protects both parties, especially from the money side.
Right.
So it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, and then your customers, your shippers, they know where the freight is. You know where your equipment is. There's just so many benefits. And then most recently we talked about the coaching and mentoring. I think that's where the perspective can be changed. You now got the data to say, hey, look, bam, here it is. This is why you need to be. And I'm going to borrow one of our members' favorite sayings. She says, either I'm going to coach you up or I'm going to coach you out. And so
Well,
you can use that for a coaching tool.
if you take your ELD and then you layer it with all of your onboard
That's
technologies,
correct.
you have what might be like the perfect scenario for coaching. ELDs by themselves, it may not provide all of the necessary tools, but if
Right.
you have the onboard technologies, your hard braking, your lane departure,
Right.
your forward and
Right.
and in cab facing cameras, and then you set those parameters, then you can actually trigger instances and have those hard discussions,
Yep.
and then hopefully coach them up.
That's right.
We
Yeah.
don't need to coach anybody out unless it's egregious. But if we have the opportunity to coach them up and keep them in the industry, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and all those drivers who said that I wasn't going to stay in the industry, they're still there. You can't
They
even
are.
pry the ELD away from
I was
them.
about to say, have you heard some of them? They're like, I thought I'd hate it. Now it's like the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah, but an ELD malfunctions, and you tell them they got to go to a paper log, they would rather sit for you to work out and go through the vendor and get everything rectified. So there are more positives than it is negative, and that's not where we want to come from. We just want to make sure that when we're using the ELD system, you got to make sure the whole goal is that we don't have drivers out there that are fatigued.
Yes.
And so that's a whole nother topic for another day. But I didn't want to prolong this, but when we start talking about falsification, you want to make sure you're checking it against the supporting documents such as your bill of ladings,
Right. Your fuel receipts.
fuel receipts. And most of them have the fuel reports. Like you may have a ComData report that has the date, time, and you want to make sure that report is either in your local time zone or, just make sure you understand what the time zone is, because that investigator or auditor may just assume that it's in the Eastern time zone and your report is being printed in Central. So
a very valid point.
just out of mistake, they just thought that everything was false because you didn't clarify that the report is in Eastern time zone. Okay. So just make sure that that's a very important thing to remember. And then also identify what hours of service rules that you're following. Am I on the 60? Am I on the 70? Am I using ag exempt? Don't laugh. Whole nother class. But, you want to make sure you clarify these things so that
Right.
the auditor doesn't make a mistake because you failed to tell them what hours of service rules you're following.
So if I am a safety director in a company, I mean, I've heard everything that you've said today. What are the top 3 key takeaways or actionable items that I need to put into place on a daily basis?
One, I would say make sure that you have somebody in that role and have that responsibility to go in and check and verify the hours of service.
So dedicated staff.
So you need to have dedicated staff. Now, with that staff, number 2, I would say is invest in your people. You have the people in the right place, but you didn't take time to train them and communicate to them, safety management cycle, on how to check for falsification, how to use the data to reduce the hours of service violations. Number 3, I would just say you need to figure out, because I know somebody will say, well, I have 100 plus drivers and maybe one person. The safety director is doing a whole bunch of different things. So there again, use your SMS, use the data in the reporting system or in the ELD system to say, okay, maybe I need to take a sample. Because remember, as a former investigator, they're only going to sample a certain amount of drivers. So you're going to have to figure out how I need to do a sample of, hours of service rules to identify those violations. And you may not have any, but that's a good thing. So those would be the most important 3 key elements that I would take away. Have the people or person in the right place, invest in them, give them the training and tools that they need. And then 3, you have to figure out how you're going to audit these logs, whether it be daily, weekly, or monthly. I wouldn't go past, we're stretching it at the month, but we want to make sure that we get it done.
Well, and that's a model that I think not only the feds use, our state investigators use them, but also DMV is beginning to look at sampling instead of doing full audits to help with the coaching perspective. So that is a very valid point. All right, so from the safety perspective, how should I, as the safety director, go out and approach my drivers and coach them as a team on this issue so that they're on board? What would you recommend?
The first thing is onboarding. It starts there. If you have your policies and procedures in place when they're going through orientation, somebody says, well, I don't have orientation. Well, you need to have some type of way you orient them into your company,
Into your process.
into your processes. Because remember, they're getting truck stop talk is what I call it. And they
Yes.
got this at that company. Integrate them into how you want the hours of service done. And then also, I think with drivers, you have to build that rapport. The dispatcher plays a part in that. I know everybody say dispatch, but that driver has an obligation to say, hey, look, I don't have the hours to do this particular run.
Right.
And now with the coercion rule,
themselves.
that kind of protects
Right.
them as well. So that rapport with the drivers, and there again, it's just having that conversation, having safety meetings, because that's another big question. Well, what safety meetings, how many safety meetings do I need to have? You know,
It should be an ongoing conversation.
or I don't have time to get everybody in person. Well, you got, portals, check with your
methods.
insurance. There's
There are
different
plenty
online
of
training.
methods.
So
And we send out a monthly
newsletter.
shield.
Yeah.
And so you've got a newsletter from
Yeah.
Safety Speaks plus the shield from TransShield. So there are options there for training.
I mean, so that's the biggest thing. I mean, you got to have ways that you can constantly reiterate this message over and over and over again.
Right. All right. Well, is there any final thoughts that we need to parlay?
Just be proactive, because remember, you sign on your MCS 150 form that you're going to be familiar and you're going to comply with the hours of service regulations and all regulations. But today we just focus more on the hours of service and making sure that these logs are not falsified.
Right.
So just wanted to give everybody some heads up, just start thinking about these things as you move forward in your compliance, creating that culture of safety.
Thank you, Dearon.
Right. Thank you all.